Welcome to our Stronghold Iron 8-step video installation series. Today we tackle step number 7, installing your gates. Hey everyone, Jason from Iron Fence Shop. In step 6, we covered your fence panel hardware, cutting fence panels, and installing the fence panels to the posts. In step 7 of our Stronghold Iron video installation series, we're going to go over how to install your gates. This is going to be a pretty long video since we'll have to cover a wide array of hinge and latch hardware along with the gate installation itself. So if you want to save some time and only go over your specific hinge and latch, use the time slider in chapters noted below to jump ahead to just your specific hinge and specific latch within the video. The timestamps for the chapters are also noted in the description below. Before we jump into today's video, I wanted to note that step 6 for installing the fence panels and step 7 for installing the gates can be switched around in sequence. Regardless of if you decide to do your gates or fence panels first, be sure to take the height relation between them into account before you get started. This should have already been decided and calculated back in step 4, but be careful to make sure you don't end up with gates and fence panels installed at different heights from each other. If you have an elevated walkway or driveway, that can make for different spacing below the gates versus below the panels. So before you accidentally install both with the same spacing underneath them, refer to your calculations and spacing notes from back in step 4. That way the two will line up with each other and the gates will swing freely. There are 3 other recommendations I want to make you aware of before we jump into the meat of this video. First, these are the hinges and latches stocked when we film these videos. These offerings have changed sometimes over the years as we've changed vendors or brought different options on board. If you don't see the hinges or latches from your order in the video here, refer to the print installation guide. The print installation guide will always have the most up-to-date offerings and information. The second note is about drilling your metal posts and gates. Unlike drilling wood, drywall, and other softer surfaces, speed is not your friend when drilling metal. If you've ever seen a large drill press in action in an automotive or metal fabrication shop, you'll notice that it's not running at a fast speed or RPM. If you've not drilled into metal before, be sure to check out our video we did about using the self-tapping fence bracket screws that I'll link in the description below. While that covers the self-tapping fence screws, all the tips and principles are the same when using a drill bit on metal. I highly recommend watching that video before you get started. One last and very important gate hardware note before we get into the hinges and latches. Before you start marking your gates and posts, test assemble your hinge and latch pieces and mark them by gate and position. There can sometimes be slight variations between our vendor supplied hinges and latches that could cause installation issues. So do not take one latch and one hinge and use it to mark all of your gates and posts. A slightly different mounting hole in a part won't affect operation and installation, but it can affect using only one piece as a marking template across the project when slight variations could be present. For pieces like the J-bolt hinge and OrnaMag latches, test fit and assemble pieces together before getting started. Double check all of your hinges will operate smoothly. Test that the keys turn and lock your latches. This will give you a chance to familiarize yourself with the parts prior to marking, drilling, and installation. I also recommend assigning and marking your hardware in regard to what gate it goes with and its position. For example, mark a set of hinges and a latch as belonging to the backyard 4-foot wide gate. One hinge should be marked as upper and the other as lower. This keeps your hardware assigned to a specific gate and ensures any markings for drilling and attachment remain correct. Alright, with those 3 hardware notes out of the way, today's gate installation video is going to break down into 4 main parts. In part 1, we'll go over the different types of gate hinges offered and the basics on how they get installed. In part 2, we'll go over the different types of gate latches offered and the basics on how they get installed. In part 3, we'll go over marking, drilling, and installing your gate. And in final part 4, we'll go over special considerations when installing 2-piece double gates. For part 1, let's take a look at the different type of gate hinges and how they get installed. We reviewed the different gate hinge options back in part 2 when we calculated your post spacing. What we're going to do here in part 1 is do a quick walkthrough on each hinge option and go over how they get installed to the posts and gate frames. I recommend watching through parts 1 and 2 fully to make note of how your specific hinges and latches attach, but hold off until installation until you watch through parts 3 and 4. We're going to do a high-level installation overview. With the exception of the J-bolt hinge, the other hinge options come with installation instructions you can refer to for more details on their installation. We'll spend a little extra time on the J-bolt hinges since they don't come with any print installation instructions. Let's go ahead and start off with the hinge we use the most on our orders, the J-bolt hinge. It's called this due to the J shape of this piece. This hinge comes in a larger 7-inch and a smaller 5.5-inch size. This can vary by project, but we typically use the larger 7-inch J-bolt with our bigger arch driveway gates, and the smaller 5.5-inch J-bolt with our walk gates and smaller non-arch double gates. The J-bolt hinge will come in 2 pieces split like this. You simply push the J-bolt portion into the backing plate, and that assembles them. If you take them apart at any time, be careful that the ball bearing in the grease does not stick to the J-bolt and then fall off and go rolling into oblivion, never to be seen again. I get more calls about that more often than you think. The biggest thing to make sure you understand and know before installing the J-bolt hinges is how to orient them. I've had countless installation calls and emails over the years stating that the J-bolt doesn't fit. When we dig into the matter, it becomes quickly evident they did not read the install instructions and are installing it backwards or upside down. When you go to drill your post and gate frame, make sure that the J-bolt portion in the threads is going through your gate frame and the piece with the backing plate is going against your post. We also recommend installing the upper and lower J-bolt hinges facing up like this. While you can flip one over to prevent the gate from being lifted off the hinges, that does put all the weight on one gate hinge and can accelerate the wear of that ball bearing. When using the J-bolt hinges, you'll also receive a bag like this with multiple bolts, washers, and nuts in it. This is the hinge hardware kit that you'll use to hold the J-bolt hinge to your post. Each bag covers a pair of J-bolt hinges. You're not going to use all the bolts in this bag. They're all the same 3/8 inch bolt size, but we provide them in several different lengths to work with the different post widths. You'll want to select a bolt that is long enough to go through your hinge plate, the post, and still have enough threads to get your washer and nut on. My little prop here is a 2-inch post with a 4-inch bolt. If you end up having more threads sticking out past the nut than you wanted, you can always trim the thread ends shorter. Just be sure to leave a few threads past the face of your nut to easily thread it on and off if need be. One frustration folks have when installing the J-bolt hinges is the 2-piece construction. If you're trying to position your hinge to the post, the hinge can come apart like this as you're trying to move and position things. One install trick is to use either a thick rubber band or some electrical tape like this and hold the pieces together while you position things and get your gate frame and post drilled. This keeps the hinge in one piece and prevents the piece from separating like that. This also keeps your 2 J-bolt pieces mated together. Don't assume that the J-bolt halves are all interchangeable between each other. They can vary by batch sometimes. We recommend to start drilling the gate frame before you drill your posts. So we're going to be drilling the gate frame and installing the threaded J-bolt end first. On our larger 7-inch J-bolt hinges, this is a 3/4 inch hole to drill, and on our 5.5-inch J-bolt hinges, this is a 5/8 inch hole to drill. I recommend starting with a smaller pilot hole and then drilling a few sizes out to your final larger hole rather than attacking it all at once with a giant drill bit. You can also use one of these called a stepper bit. This is a fairly inexpensive specialized drill bit that you can find at most stores that starts drilling in smaller and then will progressively widen the hole as it drills in. If you have smaller posts and gate frames, you may be able to have a longer drill bit that will reach through the post and drill out the other side. However, on the larger gate frames and posts, this may not be the case. In that situation, you'll want to start by marking and drilling one side of your piece completely through. You'll then want to find a fixed point on your post and gate frame that you can use as a reference point to transfer to the other side. If it is a gate post, I recommend measuring from the top of your post with no cap, down to the middle of your drilled hole. You'll then take that measurement and then transfer it to the other side of the post. This will give you the center of the hole to mark and start drilling on the other side. If this is a gate frame, then you want to use a common reference point such as the underside of your frame cap or one of the horizontal rails on the gate. When drilling the holes for your J-bolt portion in the gate frame, I recommend hogging out the hole so it fits loosely. Hogging out the hole means we're going to try and widen the hole slightly with your final drill bit size. You can do this by rotating your drill like this or putting some outward pressure in the hole in a circular motion. The reason for this is we want the gate a little loose on the threads for easier adjustment. Where the gate frame sits on these threads is how we're going to adjust the final install distance between the gate frame and the post. A looser fit makes it easier for you to push and pull the gate back and forth on the frame, especially if you're doing this with a wider and heavier gate leaf. To prevent any potential rust runs, you can give the drilled holes a shot of paint before you install the parts. We can now loosely fit our J-bolt hinge to the gate frame. One little install tip I recommend is to put a small dab of grease or lubricant on the face of the nut that will touch the gate frame. This is so that when you tighten the nut to the gate frame, it glides on the powder coat and does not grab, rip, or tear into the finish. At this point, we're going to just loosely fit the J-bolt hinge to the frame. So simply take one nut off, fit the J-bolt through the gate frame, and then fit your other nut back on to secure it. With your upper and lower J-bolt hinges secured to the gate frame as such, You can then take your gate with your affixed hinges as one unit over to the posts. You'll then mark and drill your post in the same way we went over for the gate frame. When you attach the J-bolt hinge to the post, we're going to use your selected hinge hardware kit bolt, nut, and washer. The bolt will pass through the J-bolt hinge, through the post, and be affixed with the nut and washer on the outside of the post. When your gate is affixed to the post and you have the distance between the gate frame and post set, you can snug down all of your hardware. Like with the fence bracket hardware, it only needs to be snug tight. If you over tighten the bolts, you can damage the finish on the gate frame or post and possibly pucker the metal in. The next hinge we'll discuss is the Baby Badass hinge from D&D Technologies. This is a newer hinge for us and it was primarily brought on for use with our wide frame ranch gates. However, they can be used with any of our gates. They do have some adjustability, but not nearly as much as the J-bolt hinges. The Baby Badass hinge does not come with any bolts. You'll want to supply a 1/2-inch size bolt to fit the holes. The length of the bolt will depend on the width of your gate frame and the size of your posts. Each hinge will require 4 bolts, nuts, and washers. I recommend installing the hinge to your gate frame first so you can take the gate leaf with the hinge already attached over to mark and drill your post. If you have smaller posts and gate frames, you may be able to have a longer drill bit that will reach through the post and drill out the other side. However, on the larger gate frames and posts, this may not be the case. In that situation, you'll want to start by drilling one of your holes completely through. You then want to find a fixed point on your post and gate frame that you can use as a reference point, such as a post top, frame cap, or rail, to measure down and then transfer to the other side for drilling. If it's a gate post, I recommend measuring from the top of your post with no cap down to the middle of your drilled hole. You'll then take that measurement and then transfer it to the other side of your post. This will give you the center of the hole to start marking and drilling on the other side. Once you've drilled the gate frame to attach the hinge, give the holes a little shot of touch-up paint to prevent any rust runs. Install your bolt heads facing in like this, and the nut and washers on the outside edges like this. This ensures that the threads of your bolt won't stick out and interfere with tightening this bolt head down. The width adjustability on the hinge comes from this bolt at the center. They'll typically ship loose like this. Once you've affixed the hinge to your gate frame, you'll want to snug it up so the hinge looks like this, and not dangling loose like this. You don't need to have it set at its final width, but we want it snugged up so that both halves are leveled out to where they are when the hinge will be fully installed and before marking any holes to drill on your posts. When your holes are marked and drilled in the posts, you can give them a small shot of touch-up paint to prevent any rust runs. When you attach the hinge to the post, I recommend having the bolt head on the hinge side in the same fashion as the gate frame side. When your gate is affixed to the post and you have the distance between the gate frame and post set, you can snug down all of your hardware, including the center bolt of the hinge. Like with the fence bracket hardware, it only needs to be snug tight. The final hinge we'll go over is the self-closing hinges from the D&D Technologies True Close line. This type of self-closing hinge is typically only used when swimming pool code needs to be met. However, it can be used for standard installations on non-arched gates up to 12 feet wide. They're not rated to handle our wider and heavier arched driveway gates. As the name implies, this hinge will pull the gate shut automatically, like this. You can adjust the tension and pulling power at the top here with a flathead screwdriver. That way you aren't putting the same force into closing a 3-foot tall, 4-foot wide gate that you are into a taller, wider, and heavier 6x6 gate. Since these hinges can be used on a variety of surfaces and gates, they do not ship with any attachment screws. However, you can use the same self-tapping screws used for the fence brackets to mount this hinge as well. You can also supply your own self-tapping screw if you want to use a different size or don't have enough of the bracket screws left. Each hinge will need 8 screws, 4 on the outside here and 4 on the inside here. As with the other types of hinges, I recommend attaching the hinge to the gate frame first. Once you locate where your hinge will go on the gate, simply mark the gate frame and drive your self-tapping screws in using the same tips and processes discussed in that video I mentioned being linked in the description below. One thing to be careful of when installing these hinges is that there's no adjustability like the other types of hinges, so your post spacing and installation to gate frame needs to be pretty spot on here. One little nice touch is these covers D&D supplies. They'll snap onto the face of the hinge, covering up the screw heads. That gives the hinge a cleaner look and makes it more tamper-proof. With all of our gate hinges covered, let's roll into part 2 and discuss the different latch options and their installation. We reviewed the different gate latch options back in step 2 when we calculated your post spacing. What we're going to do here in part 2 of the gate video is do a quick walkthrough on each latch option and go over how they get installed to the posts and gate frames. I recommend watching through parts 1 and 2 fully to make note of how your specific latches get mounted, but hold off on the installation of them to the gate frame and posts until after you watch parts 3 and 4. Also, we're going to do a high-level installation overview for each latch. With the exception of the simple gravity latch, the other latch options come with printed instructions you can refer to for more details on their installation. We'll start off with the most often used latch, the simple gravity latch. This little guy is the nothing fancy workhorse that we quote on most gates. If you just need an inexpensive way to hold the gate shut, these are great. The gravity latch does not come with any provided screws. It's a pretty universal latch that gets used on wood, metal, and vinyl, so the manufacturer doesn't include all the different types of screws those surfaces would require. Most folks will typically have enough self-tapping fence bracket screws left over and just use these guys. They are slightly bigger than the holes in the latch parts, but they can cut through and won't harm the latch. If you don't like the look of the bigger screws, you can also use a smaller number 8 size self-tapping screw in a 3/4 inch or 1 inch length. If you're mounting the gravity latch arm in the 1.5 inch square frame of a traditional grade iron gate, it can be a tight fit. However, I promise you, it does fit. This is the gravity latch arm mounted on a 1.5 inch gate frame with the self-tapping bracket screws. Due to the larger screw size and the small surface, I highly advise drilling some pilot holes to get things started a little easier. When installing your gravity latch, the arm will go on the gate frame and the catch will go on your post. When you pull your gate shut, it will knock this little plate up that will fall back and hold the arm. There's also a hole here you can put a small padlock on. The gravity latch has some pretty good range of adjustment too. So long as the arm hits the catch along the straight part of the arm here, you're good to go. I recommend installing the arm on your gate frame first and not installing the catch portion on the post until the gate is mounted and swinging on its hinges. Our next latch option is a different take on the gravity latch, the Lokk Latch made by D&D Technologies. The D&D Lokk Latch is the same arm and clasp style like the gravity latch, but adds in some additional features. We utilize 2 versions of the D&D Lokk Latch. There is a one-sided version that looks like everything you see on the front, then there is a 2-sided version. It utilizes the same parts as the one-sided version, but it adds this back piece so that you can both lock and open the gate from both sides. Both options offer the ability to lock the gate with a key as well. Both Lokk Latch options will come with a small bag of self-tapping screws that you'll use to install the latch to the gate frame and post. You'll mark your holes, center punch or pilot hole those spots, and then install the self-tapping screws. Use the tips and processes discussed in that video I mentioned being linked in the description below. One nice feature of the Lokk Latches is that the mounting holes in the arms are slotted, so if you find that once you attach the parts your arm and catch aren't quite connecting properly, you can loosen the screws and move this piece up and down to align it before retightening everything. When you swing the gate shut, it will knock the strike plate up and let it fall back in place. This holds the gate closed in the unlocked position. To open the gate, you slide this lever up and then push or pull the gate open. If you have the 2-sided version, you can also open it by pushing the key tab in the back. If we lock the latch with our key, this stops the lever from going back and the key tab from pushing in. Like our gravity latch, we have some range of adjustment in the arm length here for the latch arm to hit the catch. I recommend installing the arm on your gate frame first and not installing the catch portion on the post until the gate is mounted and swinging on its hinges. Our next latch option is a specialized latch used only for swimming pool code, the Magna Latch made by D&D Technologies. This latch is unique as that it's typically used only in swimming pool applications. It's built to be potentially taller than the gate to make it harder for kids to open it. National Swimming Pool Code requires that the opening mechanism for your gate be 54 inches above ground to pass inspection. This tall stalk construction allows you to still use a 4-foot tall fence that meets code, but get the gate opening mechanism 54 inches or 4.5 feet above ground to still meet code. The Magna Latch is mounted with self-tapping screws that are provided, so you'll follow the same self-tapping screw guidelines we've covered before to mount the pieces. This taller stock piece with the lock and release will mount on your post, and this small catch will go on your gate frame. There will be 2 brackets loose in the kit that you'll use to mount the taller stock piece. These slide onto the back of the piece and give you a lot of adjustability where your mounts will go. Once you have the bracket where you want it on the stock body, you'll put a small set screw into the bracket to hold it in place. The catch piece that goes on the gate will have the main piece and this small cover plate. You'll mount it to the gate frame with your self-tapping screws. There's also a small screw adjuster you can access back here to move the catch left and right for some adjustability on where it hits the stock. Once the catch is placed where you want it on the gate, you can install this little cover plate for a cleaner look and to hide the screws. When the latch is installed, there's a powerful magnet that helps pull the gate shut and hold it closed, hence where the Magna and Magna Latch comes from. In the unlocked position, you pull this knob up and it releases the magnet below, allowing the gate to be pushed or pulled open. In the locked position, it stops the knob from moving and keeps the gate from opening. Since there is some height adjustability on the stock, I recommend installing it on the post first and not installing the catch on your gate frame until the gate is mounted and swinging on its hinges. Our final latch option is the OrnaMag Latch made by Nationwide Industries. This is an all-metal latch with handles and a key lock on one side. This latch is affixed to the gate with self-tapping screws provided with the unit. Due to the heft of this unit, it's tough to demo on the tabletop here. However, we did a pretty involved assembly and installation video of the OrnaMag Latch to one of our gates. Rather than make this already long video longer, I put a link to that video in the description below. I recommend checking that out to see the finer details on the assembly and installation of this latch. If the gate is locked with the key, it will prevent the handles from going down far enough to disengage the pieces. Note that if you're mounting this on a 1.5-inch gate frame, there will be a gap like this. This latch is made to work with a wide variety of gate frame sizes. I recommend installing the main latch body to the gate frame first. Don't install the catch on the post until the gate is hung and swinging on its hinges. Now that you've reviewed and familiarized yourself with a specific hinge latch combo, we can now roll into part 3, installing your gate. For part 3, I'm going to break this down into 3 subsections related to installing your gate. We'll start with gate orientation. This will refer if the gate is hinged left or right and if it swings in or out. Next, we'll be going into some considerations on where you'll mount your hinges and latch on the gate frame and post. Lastly, we'll go over some tips and tricks to get the gate mounted and swinging from your posts. Let's start with determining your gate orientation. All of our gates are shipped as blanks. What this means is we do not pre-drill or pre-install anything that would determine which way the gate is mounted or swings. Gate orientation refers to if you want the gate to swing from the hinges on the left or right, and if it'll swing in or out. Left or right swing will be determined by which side of the gate you mount the hinges on. Choosing left or right swing depends on your layout and the landscaping around it. There is no wrong answer here. It's more of what works best in your yard. As for swinging in or out, that's dependent on 2 factors. The first is swimming pool code. If you're installing the gate to meet swimming pool code, it's required in National Pool Code that the gate swing away or out from the swimming pool. The second is your latch placement. While the J-bolt and badass hinges will allow the gate to swing in either direction, the latches will not. The latch will be your limiting factor on which direction the gate will swing. If you're using a key lockable latch, also consider which side you typically be locking it from. With the exception of the 2-sided Lokk Latch, most latches are only key locked or operated from one side. In my experience, you're usually locking or unlocking the gate as you leave home or come home. So I find it usually to be most convenient to put the latch on the face of the gate facing outward toward the road and have the gate open that way. This way the lock is facing you when you leave home and when you come home. The only exception to that rule is with driveway gates like I mentioned before. Driveway gates usually have to swing in towards the property so you can pull in your driveway and not block the road with your car or your gate leaf, especially if you're getting out of the car to manually open and close the driveway gate. Now that's not to say you can't flip it around to be key locked and swung out on the property side, and you can always reach through the opposite side of the gate to flip the latch to open or unlock it. Consider how your specific installation will use the gate, the landscaping around it, and which side you'll typically be locking it from to help make this decision. Once you've decided on the left, right, and in or out gate orientation, we now need to determine where we're going to mount the hinge and latch hardware on our gate frame and post. There is no hard and fast rule where the hinges and latch get installed on your gate leaf and posts. What we recommend on a 6-foot tall gate is going to differ from what gets recommended on a 3-foot tall gate. It can also vary based on the type of hinge and latch being used. So you're going to need to look at your specific setup and use a little bit of context and common sense when deciding where to place your hinges and latches. When it comes to your gate hinges, when in doubt, spread the hinges out. What this means is that having your hinges too close in the middle of the gate can cause issues. You typically want them closer to the top and bottom of the gate than in the center of your gate. Now that doesn't mean you want to mount them at the very top of the piece and very bottom of the piece either. I would typically say you want to aim for your hinge 6 to 8 inches off the ground and maybe 6 to 12 inches from the top of the gate. Again, these are very rough guidelines and can vary immensely based on the height, style, and construction of your specific gate. And that is where the context and common sense comes in. You'll want to make sure your hinge placement isn't too close or far apart, but also doesn't interfere with the construction and style of the piece. Don't go with an arbitrary distance from top and bottom of the gate if the placement will cause interference with horizontal rails, tightening your hardware, or decorative pieces and castings on your gate. If you're using one of our J-bolt or Baby Badass hinges that have bolts passing through the post on the other side, make sure on that fence side of the post these bolts won't run into and interfere with any fence rails or brackets on this side of the post. Luckily, when it comes to your gate latches, placement is a little more straightforward. Most gate latches get placed about 34 to 38 inches off of the ground. This is the same distance from the ground that you'll find most interior and exterior door handles at. However, this too can vary based on the height and style of the piece. If you have a 36-inch tall gate, you don't need to place your latch way up at the top of the gate frame to meet that 34 to 38 inch height suggestion. You can place it a few inches lower on the gate so it looks more sensible. Just make sure it's not set so low that it's uncomfortable or difficult to reach down and operate the latch. Another situation may be if you're looking to meet pull code on a 5-foot or 6-foot tall gate. If you wanted to skip using that stock style Magna Latch, you can use a more conventional latch and place it 54 inches or more above the ground to still meet swimming pool code. Before we determine that final gate hinge and latch placement to install them, we want to determine how far the gate will be mounted off the ground so it swings freely. For that measurement, we're going to go way back to step 4 and see what you calculated. That gap, which is the measurement from the bottom of the gate frame to the ground, was part of your post hole depth calculation. We need to make sure we know that measurement since it will influence the gate's final installed height and where the hinges and latch get attached. Do not go drilling holes in your gate frame and post until you know the gate's installed height with that gap underneath it. Once you know that gap measurement, you want to make a wood support spacer that matches it. By placing the gate on top of our wood spacer between the posts, it makes it easier to visualize the final hinge and latch placement before installing them onto the gate frame and posts. Use this as a final sense check for your gate hardware placement before marking and drilling begins. Lastly, use your bubble level to make sure your gate is sitting level on the wood spacer. Use thinner shim pieces to level the board out if the surface under it isn't even or is sloped. We want to make sure that the gate is sitting level and plumb with your bubble level tool before we start marking things for hinge and latch installation. With your gate positioned on its wood gap spacer and sitting both level and plumb, it's time to start marking, drilling, and installing things. Since there are so many different hinge and latch combinations, and there's a level of uniqueness to each project, we're not going to walk through every step of installing each one. But what we will do is go over some install pointers that apply to just about any gate installation or hardware setup that should help you get through the process. If you aren't sure of something and want some guidance on installing your gates, feel free to reach out to us Monday through Friday by email or phone, and we can help out. We're going to mark, drill, and install everything in the following sequence of steps. Step 1, attach your hinges to the gate frame. Step 2, attach your latch arm to the gate frame. Step 3, attach the hinges to your post. And step 4, attach the latch catch to the post. Unlike the tabletop fence panel model I had in our last video, I don't have a way to mimic a gate as easily, so I dragged this old rig out of storage to hopefully help with some visual aid here in the studio. While I do have this gate mounted on a wood stand that allows it to swing, it doesn't properly replicate a concreted in post or when bolted to a solid concrete slab. So if you see some wobbling or notice some misalignments, know that is due to this bending wood base and isn't what your final gate install and operation will necessarily look like. Also, this poor gate has been through about 6 different hinge and latch videos, so you may also see some extra holes drilled in the post and gate frame that won't be present on your final installation. With my sketchy gate stand and Swiss cheese prop excuses out of the way, I also wanted to mention that installing the gates works best as a 2-person job. You'll want an extra set of hands to stabilize and balance things while you mark, drill, align, and mount your gate. While I have done some solo installs with both creative and questionable bracing, it will go faster and be safer having that second person to hold things so you can ensure your gate is mounted cleanly and properly. Let's get started by attaching our hinges to the gate frame. With my gate sitting between our posts and on the wood gap spacer, I need to determine where my hinges will mount to the gate frame and post, mark my gate frame, drill my gate frame, and mount my hinge. Keep in mind all the hinge placement notes we discussed earlier in part 3 here. We don't want our hinges too close in the middle or all the way out on the ends. Be sure to account for both gate frame and post side of the hinge too when looking at placement. On this gate, I decided to mount our upper J-bolt hinge about 2 inches under the rail here and about 6.5 inches from the lower gate frame down there. Those hinge placements were based on me making sure that the horizontal rails and hardware of any fence panel on the hinge side of the gate wouldn't interfere with these bolts coming through the post on the other side over there. As you determine your final hinge placement on the gate frame, be sure to account for the following. Your gate is at its final installed height with the wood gap spacer under it. Your hinges are spaced out from the center, but not at the very top and bottom of the gate frame either. Hinge placement will not interfere with any structural or decorative elements of the gate. Hinge placement will allow you to get tools in for tightening the hardware down. Hinge placement will not interfere with any fence panels and hardware on the other side of the hinge post if bolts pass through the post. With your upper and lower hinge placement determined, we now need to mark the gate frame in preparation for drilling. To do this, I recommend using a silver Sharpie, masking tape, or a combination of both. What we want to do is make sure we have something that's going to be very clear and noticeable on this black finish. You can mark the frame directly with a silver Sharpie, or put a couple strips of masking tape on the piece to make a more noticeable marking surface. With the holes marked for drilling, you can now take the gate out from between the posts to a spot easier to work on it. Leave your wood gap spacer below the gate in place. As you begin drilling your gate frame to mount the hinge, be sure to keep all the tips we discussed before in mind. Use a center punch or small pilot hole to get things started. Use a slow to medium drill speed when drilling metal. Do not go full speed. If you can't drill completely through the frame on both sides, like some hinges require, measure to the center of your first drilled hole, and use a common reference point to transfer that measurement to the other side of your frame to mark it for drilling. If your hinge is mounting with self-tapping screws, be sure to slow down once the drilling head punches through. Final snug up of the screw should be done with a hand tool. With your holes drilled, we can now mount your hinge to the gate frame. If this is a self-closing hinge, snug the self-tapping screws up with a hand tool. If this is a J-bolt or badass hinge, give the larger holes in the frame a shot of touch-up paint to prevent any rust runs and install the bolts. Just snug down the bolts on each side of the frame, hand tight for now. For J-bolts and the badass hinge, now's a good time to roughly get your width adjustment between gate frame and post set. It's easier to slide these parts through the gate frame and adjust them without the weight of the gate on the hinge. With our hinges attached to the gate frame, let's take the gate back over, set it on the wood spacer between the posts, and work on mounting the latch to our gate frame. We're going to follow all the same steps we just did with the hinges for our latch. We'll want to start by determining our latch placement. Since all of our latches mount to the face of the gate and post, plus we only have one latch to mount versus two hinges, latch placement is a little simpler. All of our latch offerings mount with self-tapping screws. So we don't need to worry about bolts passing through gate frames and posts that could potentially cause interference issues. When it comes to latch placement on the gate frame, somewhere in the range of 34 to 38 inches off the ground is the norm. This is the same distance from the ground that you'll find most interior and exterior door handles at. Use this as a generic guideline, but don't be afraid if you need to mount the latch outside of that due to your project parameters. Use your masking tape, marker, or a combination of both to mark your gate frame where the self-tapping screws for your latch will need to go. As you begin drilling your gate frame to mount the latch, be sure to keep all of the tips we discussed before in mind. Use a slow to medium drill speed when drilling metal. Do not go full speed. When your self-tapping screw drilling head punches through, be sure to slow down your tool. Final snug up of the screw should be done with a hand tool. With our hinges and latch attached to the gate frame, let's take the gate back over and set it on the wood spacer between the posts so we can begin to work on mounting our hinges to the post. In this step, we want to get our gate leaf attached and swinging from the post. However, there are two things to consider before proceeding with the hinge to post connection: install sequence and hinge offset. We're going to mark and mount the gate hinges to the post using the same marking and drilling techniques we used back when we mounted the parts to the gate frame. When installing the hinges to your post, I recommend marking, drilling, and installing your upper hinge first, and then repeating the process with your lower hinge. If you feel comfortable with measuring and drilling metal by this point, then there's no problem marking, drilling, and installing both hinges to the post at the same time. However, if you want to start with the upper and then the lowers, this leaves you a little bit of wiggle room if anything shifts around during drilling. If you mark and drill all of your hardware holes before mounting everything, and one drilled upper hinge hole slightly shifts, it could misalign the other holes you already drilled for the lower hinge and require you to hog it out a bit. The other item to consider with your hinge to post installation is potentially offsetting your hinge on the post for latch alignment. Your gate frame is not usually the same size as your post, and we need to make sure that that size disparity doesn't affect the latch installation and function. The bigger the size difference between the post and gate frame, the more important this is to know. This will only come into play if you're using the J-bolt or badass hinge with your gate. The self-closing hinges will pull the gate frame, hinge, and latch even with the face of the post on both sides. On my prop here, we have a 1.5 inch gate frame and a 2.5 inch post. My J-bolt hinges are centered on the post, but my OrnaMag latch is attached to the face of the gate frame. So this means we have a 1 inch difference between the two sides. Let's swing around to a different angle to show what I mean. This vantage point shows the latch side of the gate. With our latch on the face of the gate frame, it angles the gate frame even with the face of the post. On the opposite side here where the hinges are, they are centered on the post, as is the gate frame. So our gate is not centered between the posts on each side in this setup. Even though the gate isn't centered on both sides of the post, and we have a 1-inch difference between the gate frame and post size, my latch still functions just fine, and it's not really that noticeable. So if it's only a 1-inch or less size difference between the gate frame and post, you should be fine to mount the J-bolt or badass hinges in the center of the post face. However, if you're using an upgraded or larger 3-inch, 4-inch, or 6-inch post, where you have more than a 1-inch size disparity between the gate frame and post, you may need to offset your hinge to the post face to pull the gate over a little so that your latch will still line up and catch. With both those items taken into consideration, mark and drill your posts. Be sure to follow the same marking and drilling techniques we discussed when installing the parts on the gate frame in steps 1 and 2. I do recommend marking your holes and then taking the gate out of the way from between the posts to drill your holes. Otherwise, your gate will be too in the way and may cause you to mismark or misdrill your holes. Once your holes are drilled, install your gate leaf with the hinges, remove the wood spacer from the ground, and test swing the gate. With our gate leaf swinging from the post, let's wrap up the gate installation by getting our latch's catch attached to the post. Before we start marking and drilling your post for your latch's catch piece, we want to run through any final spacing adjustments and tighten things down. If you're using the self-closing hinges, they have 0 adjustment, so you should just snug them down and be ready to install the latch catch on the post. If you're using the J-bolt or badass hinge, make sure to make any final post-to-gate frame width adjustments and then tighten everything down. Check the gate is sitting fairly level with your bubble level. The gate should be in its final swinging position at this moment. With our gate situated, grab your latch's catch portion along with our silver marker and masking tape and head over to the post. Most latches have a bit of range where the gate frame portion of the latch connects and holds the catch side on the post. This can take a few trial runs to set up, so I recommend putting some masking tape on the post to make your marks, as you may need to remark the holes after tweaking things. Here's our OrnaMag latch and its catch from our prop gate. When you set the catch on your post, we're looking for the magnetic bar here on the latch to fall in this opening in the catch. When you're marking your catch, we want to try and do so that you are sitting in the middle of this opening. Being in the middle of that opening allows you some wiggle room in operation of the latch in case your post shifts or you need to adjust the gate hinges. The OrnaMag catch also has an additional range of up and down motion on the backing plate that goes in your post also. However, if we look at the gravity latch here, there's no adjusting the catch plate. Again, there is some range here in the latch arm that it can hit in. However, we want it to look like this with the arm in the middle of the catch area. While it could hit way up here or hit way down here and still latch shut, it's going to be pushing or pulling the gate up and down to latch it. Once you have your gate catch positioned, mark your holes to drill in. All of your latch catches will install with self-tapping screws. Some are easier to get a marker in than others. For the deeper body units, it's sometimes easier to fully mark and drill the inner screws mounted on the latch body. Then drill in your other self-tappers here in the front body that is too deep to get a marker, center punch, or pilot hole into. Following the same marking and drilling techniques we discussed in the other steps, get your catch attached to the post. Once attached, test out the gate and do any final spacing and alignment adjustments to the hinges or latch. With your gate cleanly swinging and latching, your single gate installation is complete. However, before we go, let's talk about 2-piece double gates. In final part 4, let's go over some special considerations when installing 2-piece double gates. When we refer to a double gate, we're talking about a 2-piece gate made up of 2 halves. So a 10-foot double gate is made up of 2 5-foot halves. When installing a double gate, the installation steps are all the same as mounting a single gate with 2 exceptions: aligning the 2 gate halves and installing drop rod hardware. When it comes to double gates, the biggest additional step is getting the 2 halves of your gate lined up with each other in the center. Due to variations in yard slope and the depths of your post on each side of the gate, I don't recommend using the top of your post or the ground as your reference point. If the left post sits 3/4 inches taller than the right post, and you mark your hinges with the same distance down from the top of each post, then your gate leaves will be 3/4 inches off from lining up with each other in the middle. With our post and ground eliminated as a reliable reference point, there are 2 ways we can mark our post to drill and install your hinges so that both gate halves line up. If you like gadgets, you could use a laser level to mark both posts at the same time. These come in a wide variety of options and price points. Just keep in mind that the cheaper units may not be bright enough to be noticed on both posts. The smallest double gate is 8 feet wide, and our largest gate is 20 feet wide, so that can be a big distance for a laser to cut through on a bright sunny day. The laser level option will give you a way to mark a reliable starting point on both gate posts that you can measure up or down from. The other option is something you're going to be doing anyway during the installation. That is, putting a wood spacer under the gates to compensate for your gate to ground gap. Rather than have two smaller spaces under each leaf, you want to have one larger spacer that spans under the entire gate. However, that doesn't mean if you have a 20-foot gate, you need to go buy several 20-foot long boards. If you look at the wood on the bottom of the gate here, you'll notice it's made up of several smaller overlapping pieces. Overlapping shorter pieces like this and connecting them together allows me to make a wider and more rigid undergate wood spacer from smaller boards. If you have a wider gate, you may want to get a 6-foot or wider bubble level to go across. A narrow bubble level is only telling you that this small portion here is level. If you're dealing with a slope across the gate opening or a driveway peak for drainage, you may need to incorporate some shims and get a little more creative setting things up. It's key that the boards sit level all the way across to get reliable marks on both posts. Use either the laser level or the stack boards or a combination of both to get your posts marked and drilled. Start by getting one half of the gate fully installed and swinging from the post. Then double check everything on the second leaf is still good and then get it fully marked, drilled, and installed to the post. With both your gate leaves aligned and hung on your hinges, you can now install your latch. I would start with mounting your arm or main latch piece on the gate first. Once it's installed, I would then follow with the catch on the second leaf, like we did on the post for the single gates. This gives you the ability to have one half of the latch fully installed and stationary before lining up, marking, drilling, and installing the other catch portion of your latch on the second leaf. This brings us to our final piece of hardware for gate installation that is specific to double gates only: your drop rods. In a single gate setup, your latch is connecting to a stationary post that is rigid and can't move. However, in a double gate setup, the two leaves meeting in the middle means we have two moving pieces with no rigid stop. The drop rod gives us a way to help keep the center of the gate more stationary when closed. Your drop rod will consist of this main rod and these two hanging brackets. The drop rods are shipped without any screw hardware since, like most of our other gate hardware vendors, these parts are sold to be used in a wide variety of gate types. Most folks elect to use the same self-tapping screws provided for your fence brackets. If you don't have any left over, then any self-tapping screw in a number 14 size and 1 inch or 3/4 inch length will work. Each drop rod requires 4 screws. When you install the brackets, they can go on with them both pointing up, pointing down, or pointing away from each other. The orientation of the bracket will not affect its installation or operation. You'll notice there are 2 small tabs on the rod that correspond with this punch in the bracket. In the gate open position, the bracket will sit between these tabs like this. When we turn the rod outward, it allows the rod to drop, hence the name, and contact the ground to hold the gate in place. This is what it will look like in the gate closed position. Here's a drop rod installed in a gate leaf and in the gate open position. It's going to be mounted on the inner corner of each leaf in the middle of your double gates. When determining your bracket placement, you need to know how far down it's going to drop into the ground with the gate closed, and how far up it needs to be held not to contact your surface when opening the gate. The distance from the tabs on the rod to the handle at the top is your drop or adjustment zone. So you want to mount the upper rod bracket on the gate at a height that allows it to contact the ground, but also where it won't drag or hit when you open the gate. There are lots of factors that can affect this, such as the measurement of your under gate gap and how deep it will fall in. And that brings up another point to know with your drop rods. You probably want to aim for about 1 inch of your drop rod going into the ground. However, the ground under your gate could be grass, pavers, or a concrete driveway. We don't simply want to jam the rod into the mud or into a hole drilled in the concrete. I recommend cutting a short 1.5 to 2 inch long section of PVC or metal pipe to either bury or epoxy in even with the top of your surface. In the situation of grass, this keeps the hole from wallowing out and not holding the gate. In the case of concrete, it keeps the hole you drilled from chipping and breaking over time. When choosing the size of pipe to use, you want to aim for something that's not a super tight fit. We want a little bit of slop here so that minor bits of yard or road debris won't prevent the drop rod from falling in. When installing the drop rod, you'll want to mark and install the upper bracket first. Note that you will need your drop rod slid through the bracket before mounting it. Otherwise, you'll not be able to get the rod oriented between the tabs. With the bracket where you need it, mark both holes. As with all of our other self-tapping screw installations, I recommend using a center punch or pilot hole to pre-drill the frame before coming back with the part and self-tapping screws. If you're installing the drop rod on a 1.5-inch frame like this, it will be tight, but it will fit. After your upper bracket with the rod is installed, you can slide your lower bracket on and follow the same steps to mark and install it. One final note on the drop rods: you only need one drop rod down to hold the gate in the closed position. However, you may have noticed 2 drop rods per double gate on your order. We do this so that you can mount a drop rod on both halves of the gate. This way, when you open both sides of the gate, you can pin both leaves open at the same time. When your gate is closed in the middle, you'll have one drop rod down and the other stored in the up or open position. When you open both halves of the gate, you will turn both to the down position to hold each gate leaf open. Woo! A long video with a lot of information. However, this installation is 99% done. In part 8, we wrap up the project with touch-up and maintenance. You're this close to finished. You can click on this link to access the 8-step install series playlist. You can also visit us here at ironfenceshop.com. If you have any other questions, you can shoot us an email at sales@ironfenceshop.com or give us a call at 800-261-2729. We look forward to hearing from you.